into a colloquy with my colleague the senator from Utah.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, I hope that in tax reform we will try to do what we should do in all of our policies, and that is come up with ideas that are both pro-growth and pro-worker. There are a lot of good things in this tax bill, but we need to make it better. And we can make it more pro-growth and more pro-worker. And Senator Lee from Utah and I have a plan that helps us move in that direction. And I'll describe it briefly. And I want him to have the opportunity to weigh in as well on this. On the pro-growth side, it's about becoming more globally competitive. And we do so by lower the current corporate tax rate in the United States is 35%. We would reduce that to 22%. Now, the current bill has it at 20, but 22% is just as competitive as 20. Here's why. Just like the current bill, it would be lower than the global average rate of 23%. And just like the current bill, it would move us from last place to third place among the G7 countries. So it's just as pro-growth, it makes us just as competitive, but it allows us to do the pro-worker reform that we desperately need. Here's what it allows us to do. It allows us to change the child tax credit in the current bill to help working families even more. From one, it would make it fully refundable up to the amount you pay in payroll tax. Number two, it would eliminate the marriage penalty, meaning that you would be paying more in taxes if you were a married couple than you would as an individual. Number three, it would index it, the tax credit, to change CPI, which basically means that as inflation grows and the cost of living goes up, the credit doesn't lose its value because it doesn't go up. But the one thing I want to emphasize is who does this help? Because I've had some people in the past and even today who say, why are you doing this? This is like welfare. I find that offensive. I find it offensive not because I am offended by people who need the help and are in the safety net program because they've come upon difficult times, but because the people that we are trying to help are not on government assistance. They're workers. You have to work to get this credit. In essence, the credit applies against your tax liability, be it payroll tax or income tax. For a lot of people that are working, they don't make enough money to be paying a lot on income tax, but they pay up to 15.3% of what they make in payroll tax. It is their primary tax liability, and if you don't allow the credit to apply towards that, you're not helping them. And who are they? Who are the kinds of people that we're talking about? In essence, who are these workers? Well, this chart tells you who they are. They're the waitresses, making about $20,000 a year. They're not fully benefiting from this credit right now. If we do it the way Senator Lee and I are talking about doing, they would. They're the home health aide. They're the office clerk. They're the welders, making $35,000 a year. They're the truck driver. They're the nurse. They're the firefighter, making $48,000 a year. These are working people, the backbone of our country. The ones that have been left behind for over 3 decades because no one fights for them. They've been ignored and disrespected in our public policy, and they're not accounted for in this bill, and they're raising families, our future taxpayers. And it costs money to raise a family, and the more children you have, the more expensive it is, and our tax code should recognize that. And we make a reasonable proposal in that regard. And now I'd like to turn to Senator Lee and ask him to expound on the importance of this for America's workers, and why, if we are truly to be a pro-worker reform, if we're going to have a pro-worker reform, the expansion of the child tax credit and applying it towards payroll tax the way we've described is essential.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm grateful to my colleague, the distinguished senator from Florida, for his work on this issue. He noted a couple of issues that we focus on in this amendment. He noted, among other things, the marriage tax penalty. That's a more obvious feature, defect within our tax code. There's another defect he also mentioned that doesn't get as much play as it should. It doesn't get as much play, especially considering the amount of damage that it does. It's called the parent tax penalty. Here's how it works. We have American parents from one end of this country to another who are essentially propping up, securing the future of our senior entitlement programs, not just once but twice, and in a pretty unfair way. You see, they prop up Social Security and Medicare 2 times. First, as they pay their taxes, and secondly, as they incur the substantial costs associated with child rearing, and thereby prop up and secure Social Security and Medicare. You see, Social Security and Medicare are paid for on a pay-as-you-go basis, meaning today's workers pay for the benefits of today's retirees. Today's children are tomorrow's workers, who will in turn be working to pay the taxes to fund the Social Security and Medicare retirement benefits of today's workers who will be tomorrow's retirees. Now, those costs add up over time. According to one very lowball estimate, an estimate that doesn't include a lot of things that it probably should, including things like education, higher education, and so forth, a family raising 3 children can reasonably expect to incur $700,000 in child-rearing costs, just as they raise their 3 children. Now, those 3 children are going to go on to be tomorrow's workers, paying the Social Security and Medicare benefits for today's workers, tomorrow's retirees. This is important, and we need to end the marriage tax penalty, but we also need to end this parent tax penalty. The best way to do that is to make sure that we increase the child tax credit up to $2,000, as the current Senate proposal would do. But just as importantly, we need to make that sum refundable up to $2,000, up to the total amount of taxes paid, including payroll tax liability. In other words, up to 15.3% of earnings. If we do this, Mr. President, it's not going to end the parent tax penalty altogether, but it's an important first step. I also want to echo something said by Senator Rubio a moment ago that I think is worth mentioning here. This is not a handout. This is not a welfare benefit. This is money that they're making. It's not welfare when you say the government's not going to take away something that you've worked hard for, that you've earned. We should least of all be doing that for those people who are America's ultimate, most important entrepreneurial class, America's most cherished group of investors. You see, the most important investment decisions are not necessarily just those made around the boardroom. They're made at the altar. They're made in delivery wards at hospitals throughout America. They're made when a couple says, I do, and they agree to raise children. Those are the investors we need to be encouraging and certainly not punishing. Mr. President, we can fix this problem. We need to do it by passing the Rubio-Lee amendment and increasing refundability so that we can all benefit from this and so that America's families can stop being punished as a result of the interaction between our tax code and our senior entitlement programs. Thank you, Mr. President.